everyone, and many thanks for joining us for what I'm sure is going to be a really exciting session, examining some emerging research on Article 5.3 and the governance of tobacco control, understanding barriers to effective implementation. I'm Jeff Cullen, a professor at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm chairing this session. I don't want to take up too much time because we've got a really kind of packed program of speakers from Ethiopia, Uganda, from Delhi and from Karnataka in India and from Bangladesh, and I don't want to cut into their time, but I do just want to take a quick minute to introduce the Tobacco Control Capacity Programme, which is the context in which the research we're presenting today is being undertaken. Next slide, please, Jess. Great. So the Tobacco Control Capacity Programme is a 4-year project funded by the UK Global Challenges Research Fund, and we're undertaking research in 8 countries in South Asia and in Africa. The general aim is to generate high quality research that can help support effective implementation of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, with particular focus on governance issues and seeking to advance broader development priorities in the countries in which we're working. So the research program includes foci on taxation, on illicit trade, on smoke-free policies. There's been a related project on COVID-19 and tobacco. And this morning, we're going to look at our strand of research on Article 5.3, which I'm sure all of you know is the part of the Framework Convention that deals with trying to prevent tobacco industry interference in the making of tobacco control policy. So our general objective here is to address the research question: what are the principal barriers experienced by governments in protecting health policy from tobacco industry interference? Next slide, please. So Article 5.3 is a small article with some really big implications for tobacco control, and we think for health governance more broadly. And it also raises some really big questions in terms of its status within the FCTC and significance to tobacco control. So very often, Article 5.3 is presented as the backbone of the convention or the cornerstone of the FCTC, and is seen as foundational and central to its very purpose. And yet in practice, it's often seen in some respects as if it's somewhat marginal and peripheral, and the general track record of implementation of the article and of its implementation guidelines has been pretty weak. While many see tobacco industry interference as the biggest barrier to progress for the FCTC, and the expert group reviewing implementation identified this as the single highest priority for progressing the FCTC more broadly, in practice it can often seem neglected. And while there has been progress, there are also concerns about that potentially being eroded in the context of policy pressures associated with COVID. And perhaps the big kind of paradox, if you like, is that more broadly, Article 5.3 is increasingly seen as a model for regulating other unhealthy commodity industries like alcohol, like ultra-processed foods, and attracts some kind of envy, if you like, from researchers and advocates in those fields. And yet our evidence base for its effectiveness is somewhat limited. Next slide, please. So there are some really major research gaps. Overall, there's a dearth of research. There's been surprisingly little done. And in particular, there's been very little research on implementation in low and middle income countries. Of the research that has occurred, most has focused on monitoring industry interference rather than thinking about the policy challenges for governments in implementing 5.3. The research has often been based on quite limited forms of publicly available documents and data. And so we think there's a need for research that can really analyze Article 5.3 as a distinctive model of governance, if you like, that we can, as my colleague Rob Ralston refers to it, think of it as a policy instrument, and to try to unpack specific norms, rules, and practices that make up Article 5.3 and its implementation. We need to better understand the extent of tensions with other related policy spheres, and to think about how we might manage those tensions and identify opportunities for greater coordination at national level and to promote policy coherence. Next slide, please. And so our approach has been very qualitative. We've undertaken a big program, an ongoing program of semi-structured interviews with policymakers and advocates. We're trying to engage with officials working beyond health in agriculture, trade, finance and development, with a research guide that asks questions around the extent of sensitization and awareness of 5.3, implementation issues and knowledge and perceptions of industry interactions. I would just like to note that this is very much work in progress. So I think we're particularly privileged that our colleagues are presenting at this early stage. Really, this is emergent themes in the research that are being developed with a view to publication in a supplement in the journal Tobacco Control in early 2022. Next slide, please. So I don't want to spend any more time introducing this and maximize the time both for our speakers and particularly to ensure that we have time for Q&A session at the end of this. Please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to pose questions at any point during the event, and we'll cluster these and take the questions at the end of the presentations. And with that, it's a real pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, who is Slamwet Herpa from Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Professor Jeff. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My presentation entitled, "They Have the Right to Participate as a Stakeholder, Examining Government-Industry Interaction in Ethiopia." Next slide, please. So I will start my presentation with the research context. So in year of 2017, Japan Tobacco International became the major shareholder of the National Tobacco Enterprise in Ethiopia. The National Tobacco Enterprise in Ethiopia was a state-owned monopoly for many years. When we come to the tobacco prevalence in Ethiopia, Ethiopia has comparatively low rate of tobacco prevalence compared to many countries in the world, or specifically also in the African region. But the retail sale of tobacco have steadily increased post-privatization. When we see the tobacco control law in Ethiopia, Ethiopia is one of the countries that has a strong tobacco control law, and this proclamation was approved in year of 2019, and it's encouraging that it includes several Article 5.3 guideline recommendation, though there are key guideline recommendations that have been omitted from this proclamation. Some of the most important one are, the first one is reject partnership and non-binding or non-enforceable agreement with the tobacco industry. The second one is don't give preferential treatment to the tobacco industry. The third one is treat state-owned tobacco industry in the same way as any other tobacco industry. So these three important Article 5.3 recommendations are omitted from the proclamation. Next slide, please. So we have conducted 21 in-depth interviews in the health departments like Ministry of Health and Food and Drug Administration, and also in departments beyond health like Ministry of Trade, Custom, Ministry of also Revenue, and other research institutions and NGOs. So when we come to our finding, the first one is about competing ideas about conflict of interest. So interview data highlights differences between health department and policymakers in government sectors beyond health. For example, one of the quotes from policy official from health department states that there is a definitely conflict of interest. Our goals are totally opposite, and the tobacco industry is not our partner. In the other side, an interviewee from the department beyond health said that there is a mutual interest in preventing illegal trade. It is the interest of the government and the industry. It is a mutual interest. There are no conflict of ideas. and the government needs to work in coordination in area of tobacco smuggling to get the benefit of tobacco sector. So you can see competing ideas about conflict of interest, especially in departments between health and departments beyond health. Next slide, please. The other finding is requirement for stakeholder consultation in tension with Article 5.3 implementation. So in Ethiopia, the Council of Ministers Directive requires all stakeholders should be consulted before approval of policy. In addition, documentation of the meeting minute with all stakeholders is required. So in case of tobacco control policy, tobacco industry is one of the stakeholders. So regarding this, some of the interviewee stated that, for example, an interviewee from Food and Drug Administration said that there is a lack of clarity on this. The convention forbids them to get involved or influence policy process due to conflicts of interest, but our country's law dictates involvement of all stakeholders during the preparation of any draft law. Another senior policy official, it's in Department Beyond Health, also stated that what we do is making sure they are involved during meetings that are held at ministry level. If there is anything left, we suggest for them to include as per the cabinet regulation. It states stakeholder engagement should be clear with explanatory minutes. So you can see the tension between implementing Article 5.3 guideline and also respecting the Council of Ministers Directive requirement. Next slide, please. The other thing is the political legacy of state-owned tobacco monopoly. That's one of our findings. So as I have mentioned previously, the National Tobacco Enterprise was state-owned monopoly for many years and have a close relationship with the government. So one of the interviewees said that until recently, government officials were board members. Therefore, we cannot say that the interest of the National Tobacco Enterprise and the government were separate. Another interviewee from Custom also said that we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the National Tobacco Enterprise, and the main objective of the memorandum is the prevention of illegal trade in tobacco. The other is the exchange of information, and it's about sharing information. So this was not only the interviewee who said that or who had a perception that there's no problem to work with tobacco industry, or there's no problem if the government will work with the tobacco industry, especially in regards to preventing illegal tobacco trade. Next slide, please. So when we come to the implication based on our finding, challenges and opportunities for Article 5.3 implementation, the first one is challenge of partial and inconsistent approach to Article 5.3. This is especially in relation with the requirement of stakeholder consultation or the requirement of the Council of Ministers Directive. This is one of the challenge. The other one is challenge of sensitization to Article 5.3. and competing understanding of conflict of interest. So as I mentioned in the results section, there are especially interviews from departments beyond health with low awareness of Article 5.3. So it's one of the challenge for implementation of Article 5.3. The other one is opportunity for comprehensive implementation of codified guideline. So Ethiopia is one of the country with strong tobacco control law, which was also recognized by WHO in year of 2019. So this is one of the opportunity for the implementation. The last one is high-level political support for tobacco control. For example, recently in year of 2019, tobacco industry monitoring committee was organized, and it's closely working with the Food and Drug Administration Control, that's the lead organization of tobacco control. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Salama. That was great. I mean, Ethiopia is such an exciting and important country for tobacco control research for all sorts of reasons, but I think in this context, particularly the significance of the transition from the state-owned tobacco monopoly and thinking about 5.3 in that context is really interesting. So our next speaker is Dennis Marley from the Centre for Tobacco Control in Africa and Makerere University in Kampala in Uganda. One of the really exciting things about the TCCP is the way in which our research project is split pretty much 50-50 between universities and research institutions and NGOs and other civil society organizations. And I guess Dennis embodies both sides of that. So it's a real pleasure to introduce him.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for that wonderful introduction. So you have to support the economy of your country. So my presentation today focuses on Article 5.3 and competing policy priorities in Uganda. So just to put this, next slide, please. So to put the work in context, you will realize that Uganda has been hailed as one of the success stories in tobacco control, having signed the FCTC quite early and subsequently comprehensively adopting the FCTC as well as the WHO guidelines in its national law. And in the recent Stop Index report, Uganda was ranked third best among those countries that have done well at minimizing tobacco industry interference in its health policy. However, despite all these, good-looking accolades, there are still significant questions to be asked as far as how Article 5.3 has been implemented in Uganda. A good example to illustrate this is a recent law point during which two major tobacco companies made contributions to the national COVID-19 response. And this gesture was highly recognized by the president of Uganda on all national media as a gesture of goodwill. Such acts illustrate the complexity of the environment within Article 5.3 is implemented in many countries, both low and high income countries. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share with you some of the findings that we have following our interviews at national level. Next slide, please. So our data indeed shows that Article 5.3 has not been well integrated into some of the government sectors. And what we see is that Article 5.3 is not recognized as a cross-cutting issue. For the most part, it has been framed as a duty of the Ministry of Health, while other sectors kind of look on as passive partners. And as a result of this policy silo-natured work, we see a variation in the level of 5.3 awareness across different sectors, with officials in the Ministry of Health seemingly having a high level of awareness, whereas our data shows indications that in other sectors such as water and environment and Ministry of Trade, there are indications that there are virtually no measures to limit the interaction between government and the tobacco industry. Next slide, please. So another key finding of our study is competing mandates as an inherent challenge of implementing multi-sectoral policies such as Article 5.3. And one such competing mandate is economic growth. In many ways, we see that sectors view economic growth as a prime policy goal. For instance, our respondent from the Ministry of Trade said, as a ministry, of course, there is conflict of interest, but you have to support the economy of your country. For us, it's trade. Such a view really illustrates how much tension exists between the mandates that individuals who are supposed to implement Article 5.3 face, while others argued that actually the tobacco industry should be viewed as a stakeholder because it provides employment. It's a taxpayer, so it's a stakeholder. And that further illustrates the challenge of implementing such a cross-cutting policy instrument. Next slide, please. On a positive note, even within those non-health sectors where we thought the level of 5.3 awareness was previously low, when the interviewees were explained to about 5.3 in detail, there was a sense of optimism and enthusiasm to engage more with Article 5.3. And in fact, some interviewees indicated that more could be done to support policy integration. For instance, one said, but there could be a deliberate effort to make people understand this policy better. Another said, I would have expected the Ministry of Health to engage us after passing the law. So you see that there is a deep lying appetite to engage more with tobacco control and specifically Article 5.3. That is if we make an effort to sensitize and provide more information to all sectors across government. Next slide, please. So another key finding of our study was that indeed there was this perception among interviewees that the national coordination mechanism was not performing as well as expected, with some citing technical challenges while others citing budgetary issues as major obstacles to effective coordination. Remember that these multi-sectoral national coordination mechanisms are prescribed in Article 5.1 and 5.2 as of the FCTC as entities that would oversee the implementation of tobacco control interventions within parties, but the realization that this has not really been done as expected is important to note. Next slide, please. So, and really reflecting on our findings of our study, we see that even in a country such as Uganda that is regarded as a tobacco control success story, there's still limited engagement in Article 5.3 beyond health sectors. But despite all this, there's positive signs of willingness from those non-health sectors, especially to implement Article 5.3. We see this when interviewers provided some information about Article 5.3. There's also potential to reduce the tensions and conflicts that exist across government sectors. But to achieve all this, I think we need to strengthen the national coordination mechanisms for tobacco control in Uganda as a lever for improved coordination. Thank you so much, listeners.
Thank you, Dennis. That was a really great presentation. I mean, I think that the framing of this as a case study in what's seen as a success story in this space, and yet the significant challenges that exist is really important internationally. But I do think it's particularly exciting to highlight those positive signs of willingness in policy to engage in policy areas that might easily be thought of as conflictual. So I think exploring that is really useful. Just to remind, I'm sure there's lots of questions. Just a reminder to people in the audience to please do use the Q&A function to ask any questions of the panel, and we'll cluster those together at the end. Okay, it's moving swiftly on to our next speaker, which is the first of two presentations from India, which is particularly exciting for a number of reasons. So most of the work that's been done on 5.3 has very much been done at the national level. but these two different complementary presentations look at different aspects and help us to understand a kind of multi-level governance approach to 5.3, if you like. So first up is Shalini Basi from Haride, looking at state-level implementation.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Jeff, and very good afternoon to all of you from India. So I will be presenting the preliminary findings from the study which we undertook as part of Tobacco Control Capacity Building Program to study the implementation of WHO FCTC Article 5.3 at subnational level in India. Next slide, please. So over decades, India achieved critical milestone in tobacco control. However, like other countries, in India, too, tobacco industries uses various tactics to interfere in tobacco control policy development and the implementation. And there are quite a lot of incidents, but one of the recent example at the time of e-cigarette ban in India, that is in year 2019, where industry and several industry linked and supported group requested government not to ban and consider regulating these product as a harm reduction products. So there is no national-wide policies to prevent tobacco industry interference in India. And in India, health being a state subject and considering this, several Indian states have taken efforts and issued a notification and the guidelines at the state and the district level. And more recently in July 2020 at the national level, the Ministry of Health and the Family Welfare Government of India has adopted Code of Conduct for public officials to prevent tobacco industry interference and the conflict of interest. On one hand, these state level notifications are applicable to all department and the ministries of that state. However, this code of conduct which has been issued by the health ministry is only applicable for public officials of the Ministry of Health, its department and the offices under its jurisdiction. And these state level notification, these generated evidences and provided groundwork for Government of India, Ministry of Health to adopt the code of conduct for the ministry officials. Next slide. So we conducted a desk review of subnational level notification and guidelines from 12 states issued since year 2015. And in addition, we also reviewed Ministry of Health Code of Conduct. And the comprehensiveness of these notification and the protocol were analyzed against 8 recommendations provided in Article 5.3 guidelines for addressing tobacco industry interference in public health policies. And these recommendations are in the area of, as you see in the table, raising awareness about tobacco industry interference and limit interactions with TI, reject partnership and LICON as listed in the table. So I'm not going into detail of the findings, but we found some specific trend of these policies. So as you see in the table, awareness raising is part of all notifications. Only 2 states have regulation on CSR activities of industry, and majority of the state notification explained meeting procedures to limit interaction and have prescribed code of conduct to avoid conflict of interest with the industry. And none of the state and the ministry notification imposed any measure against preferential treatment to tobacco industry. And apart from this, there is also a special committee on 5.3, which has also constituted in 8 out of 12 states and under the ministry protocol to ensure that proper meeting protocols to be followed while dealing and meeting with any tobacco industry and its representative. And prior approval of such meeting has to be taken from the designated officer, and approval has to only be given if it is in the meeting is in the interest of public health policy. Next slide. So apart from reviewing these notifications, we also conducted qualitative study wherein we conducted in-depth interviews with various stakeholders from health, non-health, and the civil society representation from the state. Those have issued these notification and at the national level to understand the process and implementation of these guidelines, and also the stakeholders' perspective regarding enforcement of these guidelines at the national level. And the study highlighted the role of civil society as a catalyst in the process of initiating the development and issuing of these guidelines. And you can also see from the course which has been generated from this IDI's data. And the role reported varied from organizing awareness and sensitization workshops at district level, state level, and the national level, providing legislative support in drafting of these guidelines, technical support to the state tobacco control cell, as well as monitoring. Next slide. So the study data also highlighted that each state had an exclusive set of challenges related to the implementation of these guidelines. And some of the key challenges included a non-priority for the state, as well as for other department and ministries except the health department, and lack of awareness about the existing policies and the FCTC guidelines among these officials, and lack of monitoring and violation reporting mechanisms. Next slide. So based on the study, we found that there is a need to strengthen the implementation of these guidelines. While a detailed report of the recommendations will be published, but some of the key suggested measures that there is a need to sensitize public officials from all departments and ministries, and also medical bodies and associations on 5.3 guidelines and the monitoring of industry interference. Guidelines are there, but there is a need for strong monitoring and violation reporting mechanism. And some of the states have taken efforts in this regard, which could be the learning for other states. And our study also highlighted a major role of civil society organization in the process of notifying these guidelines. But currently, the representation of CSO is missing under the empowered committee constituted for 5.3. Also, there is a need to have central repository to report violation and track country progress on implementation of 5.3. And in this regard, Hirde, in collaboration with other civil societies in India, conducted a comprehensive review for subsequent 3 years using standardized tool to assess the frequency, severity, and what was the government response to those interference. And this indicated a constant decrease in industry interference incidences in India from year 2017 to 2019. And lastly, the need of the hour is to have a national policy framework which is applicable to all officials from all ministries, department, as well as elected leaders. And also national policy framework is needed so that we can have uniformity across regarding these guidelines across state. Thank you all for listening. Thanks all.
Thanks, Shalini. That was a really great presentation with a lot in it. And I'm still so excited by that table of state level notifications of Article 5.3, the greens and the reds, which say much about the ambition of Article 5.3 and also about the challenges in ensuring effective implementation, which I think leads very nicely on to our next presentation from Praveen Kumar, who's based in Manipal in Karnataka, who's going to give the first presentation I'm aware of that's looked at district level implementation of Article 5.3.
Thank you, Professor Jeff. Hello, everyone. Myself, Praveen, presenting before you our study titled From District Level Implementation to Adopting a State Protocol, Article 5.3 in Karnataka, India. Our team members are Dr. Veena Kamath, Dr. Muralidhar Kulakarni, and Dr. Asha Kamath from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, India. Next slide, please. Karnataka. The southern state of India is a major tobacco growing state with the presence of tobacco industry. The FCV tobacco grown in Mysore district of Karnataka is known for its export quality. It's also a hub for BD industry. In 2004, Government of Karnataka constituted the State Tobacco Control Cell, which is responsible for implementing tobacco control activities at the state level. With the help of District Local Coordination Committee or District Tobacco Control Cell at the district level. Now, this District Local Coordination Committee consists of members from both health and beyond the health departments. To name few of the non-health department, it includes education, police, tax, revenue, etc. Between 2017 to 2018, 8 out of 30 districts had issued a policy in line with Article 5.3 before state could adopt a protocol to prevent tobacco industry interference in 2019. So during this process of implementing Article 5.3 at the district level and adopting a state protocol, government faced many challenges. Next slide. The initial challenge was sensitizing all the departments about the relevance of the FCTC and Article 5.3. So one side, government was trying to create awareness about the Article 5.3 and FCTC, and other side, tobacco industry attempts to collaborate with the district administration in the pretext of CSR. When such interferences are taking place, it is very essential to document that and report it to the higher officials, and also share it among all the other departments so that people understand the tactics of tobacco industry, even at the state and district level, and also they understand the importance of Article 5.3. But to monitor tobacco industry regularly and generate such evidences, we need technical support, which is currently lacking at the subnational level. As one of our state level tobacco control enforcement officer quoted during the interview, that it's very important to have some kind of documentation about the interference and a solid technical team to sensitize the key officers, and some examples of other states, examples of other good practices from other states is very much lacking at this moment. So even though challenges are there, it also opens up some of the opportunities. To see that, next slide. One of the biggest opportunity is to enhance the intersectoral coordination via state and district tobacco control committees. As I mentioned earlier, there is a state level tobacco control committee and also a district level tobacco control committee. So both are working hand in hand. There is a good coordination and the relationship between these committees. There is a quarterly meeting which takes place at the district level where the state officials attend and see the progress at the district level. So we need to leverage this existing coordination between various levels of the governance. As one of the district level officer mentioned during the interview, that good thing is that already we are doing the enforcement activities with the help of this team, including food safety and police department, and everyone is accompanying us. So this shows that there is a different coordination between various levels of the government and also between different departments, including health and non-health departments. So we need to leverage this existing coordination for the effective implementation of Article 5.3. As 8 districts implemented Article 5.3 before the state notification, so there is some kind of understanding about the guidelines of Article 5.3. So we also need to utilize this existing knowledge for the better implementation of Article 5.3 in all the other districts and also at the state level. If any policy has to be introduced or implemented at any levels of the governance, we need committed officials and some champions to lead it. We have such officials at the state level and also at the district level. They have done it with the help of active participation by the civil society. Now, what is required at this moment is some resources to support their will, their interest, so that we can effectively continue the implementation of Article 5.3 at all levels of the governance. As a previous presenter, Shalini, mentioned that Article 5.3 is implemented in 12 states in India. So it opens up the opportunity for other non-notified states to follow the bottom-up approach followed by Karnataka and introduce and implement Article 5.3 in their states, also for the other countries to follow this bottom-up approach in their respective places. So we see a positive development in our state, and we hope that this effort will definitely contribute to the national and the international efforts to control tobacco. Thank you.
Thanks, Praveen. That was great. And alongside Shalini's presentation, this focus on thinking about district, state, national level dynamics, I think is really an exciting part of the research. And particular thanks to Praveen for presenting at a really very early stage of the research, which is still very much ongoing, and which also applies to our next speaker, SM Abdullah. Both Praveen and Abdullah have had to cope with the challenges of trying to do qualitative research in the context of COVID. And those challenges have been very real, as you can imagine, but it also, I think, raises some important analytical opportunities as well, which we're going to hear from Abdullah now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jeff, and thanks everyone for giving me the opportunity to share a scenario of Bangladesh in the context of Article 5.3 implementation. And I will be sharing our experience of applying an ongoing study regarding Article 5.3 in Bangladesh. Next slide, please, Jeff. Okay. So just to share the research context in Bangladesh, during January 2016, Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh announced a long-term aim to become tobacco-free by 2040. With this distinguished commitment, the country is motivated to have a public health policymaking environment free from tobacco industry interference. Nevertheless, repeated tobacco industry interference flagged as the main stumbling block for effective tobacco control measure. Consequently, the country belongs to worst performers group and ranked 27th out of 57 countries with an interference index score of 68 in the Tobacco Industry Interference Index Report 2020. Ironically, government owns around 10% share in the top tobacco company, British American Tobacco in Bangladesh. Also, several high-level government officials hold positions in the board of directors for British American Tobacco. While the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has shown commitment in tobacco control efforts, Ministry of Finance and especially National Board of Revenue has been utilized successfully by tobacco companies to impede policies important for curbing tobacco prevalence. And we have such several examples in the recent past. This had happened during the Supplementary Duty Act 2020 amendment, and also this had happened during the implementation of pictorial health warning. But what happened recently during the COVID-19 pandemic was something interesting. During COVID-19 pandemic, industry interference actually intensified in Bangladesh, and British American Tobacco lobbied Ministry of Industries to continue their regular business activity during lockdown. Similar lobbying was also performed by Japan Tobacco International. Both the companies exploited an outdated law in Bangladesh named Essential Commodities Act 1956, which categorized cigarette as essential commodity. Followed by intense criticism from Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, they have initiated prompt action and issued letter requesting withdrawal of permission to Ministry of Industry through National Tobacco Control Cell. Shortly after, the request was turned down by Ministry of Industry, and followed by extensive pressure, the ministry had to take back the request letter. So this was the level of interference that Bangladesh have experienced during the pandemic time. So interaction between the tobacco industry and government officials was there and still going on. And for this reason, we can see that there is persistent delays in implementing Article 5.3 regulations in the country. Next slide, please. So what are the institutional challenges that Bangladesh actually is facing currently in terms of implementing Article 5.3? Just to give you the background, that Bangladesh ratified the World Health Organization Framework Convention of Tobacco Control during the year 2004, and followed by, as a functional body of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare for tobacco control initiatives in Bangladesh, National Tobacco Control Cell was established in 2007. And National Tobacco Control Cell aims to coordinate tobacco control activities, monitor tobacco control law implementation, curb tobacco consumption, cultivation and production, and conduct research and training to enhance the capacity of tobacco control stakeholders. So the reflection that we have received from our interview participants of our study regarding the knowledge and awareness about Article 5.3 across different government bodies is that though National Tobacco Control Cell and hence Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is well aware about the Article 5.3, but that in other ministries is still not there significantly, and also there is lack of interministerial coordination. In addition, NTCC has limited institutional memory, as conventionally the coordinator post is transferable. The limitation of resources impede the cell from performing extensive monitoring, awareness building initiative, and quality research. All these resulted in limitation of mandate for the organization. And as you can see, that one of our participants said that NTCC has a clear idea about Article 5.3, but they do not have the ability to say anything out loud about it. Also, they have shared with us that sometimes they usually make the recommendation to National Board of Revenue and Ministry of Finance before budget every year, but most of the time actually the recommendations are turned down, unfortunately. So having said these challenges, what are the opportunities that Bangladesh can go for to implement the Article 5.3 properly in the country? Next slide, please. So during our study, we have invited participants from civil society, academicians, think tank, tobacco control advocates, government officials, and media personals. So from their responses, we have seen that several NGOs are working, in this particular area of Article 5.3, and they have different programs for sensitizing different stakeholders working in the implementation of Article 5.3. And just to name a few, Work for Better Bangladesh Trust and ProGuard, two famous NGOs who are working in this particular field for the implementation. However, since the sensitization requires involvement of government officials, they are usually supported by National Tobacco Control Cell. Similarly, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare through National Tobacco Control Cell also organizes different capacity building program for officials. Since there is limitation in terms of strength and resources, the collaboration among NTCC and NGOs might be increased, and extensive sensitization program can be carried out targeting different government bodies working in division, district, and sub-district level. The good thing is that currently National Tobacco Control Cell is drafting the national guideline for the FCTC Article 5.3 implementation, and they're also drafting a code of conduct for interaction. Once this is finalized, an independent task force committee should be in place for monitoring tobacco control and governance. So all these will limit the interaction and make it transparent, and also aware the officials about the obligations. Eventually, the policy making will be free from the interference. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and this research is still ongoing. Happy to answer any queries.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dennis. Sorry, Abdullah, apologies. I was looking at the questions. That was a really great presentation of some of the distinctive challenges of implementing 5.3 in Bangladesh, and particularly in the context of COVID. So I'm delighted that we've, due to our speakers sticking to time, we've managed to keep some time for questions. Please do keep them coming through in the under the Q&A button. I'd like to pose the first question, if I may, to Salemowit, given that she presented first. And we have a question here from Lauren Carters-White, who's a colleague on a closely linked project Spectrum here at Edinburgh. Lauren, thanks you for a great presentation and focuses on your discussion of the tension between implementing Article 5.3 and the requirement by the Ethiopian government of consultation with all stakeholders, including the tobacco industry. So Lauren's asking if you had any ideas for yourself or from the stakeholders on how to address this tension.
Okay, thank you, Lauren, for a very good question. So maybe my opinion on this is, when we conduct the study, we asked the FDA people why they consider the industry as a stakeholder. They said because it's a Council of Minister requirement, and we said that why they didn't inform that the tobacco industry should not be considered as a stakeholder. Their response was like the Council of Minister is in higher position. So as an office, they have to respect what has been said from the higher officials. So we, in this study, we had also a chance to conduct an interview with a previous member of the Council of Minister. So we asked the same question: why do you require, or why do you consider the tobacco industry as a stakeholder and request the FDA people? So the same question. So his response was, we don't know whether, we don't know about Article 5.3, so the lead organization or the FDA should be the one who should tell us that the industry should not be implemented or should not be considered as a stakeholder. So he recommended that in any country, when the WHO Framework Convention for Tobacco Control is ratified, the lead organization should be the one should inform. So just to say it in one sentence, increasing our 5.3 could be a possible answer for this question.
Thanks, Salama. That's a great answer. I wonder if I could pose a similar question to Dennis, because I think one of the really interesting things to come out of the Uganda data is this sense that, yes, of course, there are conflicts of interest, and of course, there are different priorities in other sectors, but there might be some more opportunities than we perhaps anticipate for support in sectors like trade and agriculture once they become aware of the issues around tobacco industry interference. I was wondering, Dennis, if you wanted to reflect on that?
Yes, Jeff. I think that was a very promising finding from the Ugandan data. And that really speaks to the study as a whole because of the the fact that the coordination has not been wide enough. There are a lot of stakeholders within the different government sectors who have not had the opportunity to really engage with 5.3. So it is very early to judge what their response would be had they had the opportunity. And our finding on that sense of optimism illustrates exactly this, that if there is an opportunity to really sensitize the different sectors through the improved coordination, then we might see a totally different horizon going forward.
Thanks, Dennis. That's great. And again, I think finding these signs for optimism, for scope for more effective implementation is really very encouraging. I'd like to pose the next question to Shalini, and I'm glad that someone has posed a question around the table, so I'm not the only one who finds it so exciting. And you've been asked to expand a bit on why you might think there were kind of commonalities across the policies for aspects that were missing, and does that suggest that there are aspects of Article 5.3 that are easier to implement and some that are rather more difficult, and that we maybe need to pay a bit more attention to those latter ones?
Yeah, yes, you are right, Lauren. The aspects which were missing in these policies were difficult to operationalize and were fuzzier. However, it is only possible to regulate this if the state has thorough understanding and the strong tobacco control commitment and the vision, while when the state did not have robust vision, and those soft part were misused. So that could be the possible answers from my side, as based on the data and interactions with the various stakeholders, both at the state as at the national level.
Thanks very much, Shalini. And I mean, again, as I said before, one of the things that I think is really exciting is this opportunity for us to explore multi-level governance of Article 5.3 in India, and we've got a couple of questions that pick up on those strands for Praveen in the really interesting context of Karnataka. And we've got a question from our colleague Rachel Barry about looking at variation across the 4 districts that you're examining in Karnataka, Praveen. So can you kind of say a little bit about the pattern of variation across those 4 districts, and maybe whether that relates to anything about the significance of tobacco growing, etc., in the region?
Yeah, so the 4 districts which we have taken for the study, in that 2 were notified earlier, the district which I mentioned, and 2 were non-notified at the district level. So when I was mentioning about the pre-existing awareness about the Article 5.3, and that may help to leverage better implementation of Article 5.3. So it's not mean that they are well aware of all the guidelines about Article 5.3. In fact, we had one more objective, which was assessing the awareness about Article 5.3. So based on that findings, if I have to add here, the awareness about FCTC is there. But when it comes to Article 5.3, specifically, they are not aware that Article 5.3 is meant for the tobacco industry interferences. So they are aware generally that they should not participate in any tobacco industry activities. CSR should not be taken. Money should not be taken. So this general awareness is there in some of the state districts which notified Article 5.3, but definitely not that their understanding is very thorough and clear in this matter.
Thanks, Praveen. That's great. And a question now from our colleague Kavri Qureshi for Abdullah, who mentioned the very encouraging signs of high-level political commitment from the Prime Minister in Bangladesh now. Do you think this commitment is going to have any impact on the implementation of Article 5.3?
Thank you. So obviously, having this high-level commitment is important as far as tobacco control is concerned. Having this kind of high-level commitment has a very important role to play. And obviously, I would say that we have started our journey after signing the FCTC back in 2004, and the establishment of NTCC back in 2007. But the all tobacco control dynamics have got a new dimension, and the new speed up have taken place after this high level commitment. So obviously the current drafting of this code of conduct for interference definitely can be considered as a result of this high level commitment. And we believe that once this code of conduct is finalized, and if there is a task force committee who can work independently for the governance and supervision of this Article 5.3 implementation, definitely that's going to be helpful.
Thanks, Abdullah. I'd like to quickly bring in our colleague Rob Ralston, who's been working with each of the colleagues who've presented this morning. And there's a broader question from our colleague Alison McCallum about whether we need to kind of explore definitions of stakeholder in this context, which I think this also kind of maybe echoes broader questions that Shobha and others have posed about thinking about this about 5.3 in other contexts as well. The questions of how do we understand stakeholder and dialogue in the context of health policy.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I think one way to think about it is to conceptualize Article 5.3 as a policy instrument. So to think about 5.3 as both a norm of excluding the tobacco industry from policymaking, but then also a set of procedures and practices that give effect to that norm and operationalize that norm. And so I guess the interesting question around stakeholder engagement is to what extent you can have codified procedures and practices in the absence of a norm. So this, in effect, you have ongoing practices of stakeholder consultations, largely because officials in government sectors beyond health may not be sensitized to the norm of 5.3. So I think there are ways to think about 5.3 as a policy instrument that help respond and kind of think about ways in which its implementation has been quite uneven and partial. So as you say, with respect to things like stakeholder consultation. So yeah, that would be, I guess, my response to try and answer a few of those questions.
Thanks very much, Rob. That's really helpful. I'm afraid we're beginning to run out of time quite quickly. There's a number of questions here which we will try and engage with offline to people who've posed them where we have those contact details. And please do feel free to contact speakers directly once you have our contact details. We're very keen to keep this conversation going. I would just like to give the speakers one last chance to, A, I want to thank them all, but B, to see if there's any one last thing that they would most like to tell you about from the findings that they think of as particularly exciting or interesting in the research moving forward. So we'll go through in order. There's no pressure to do so, but I did just want to give you the opportunity to say one last thing if you haven't had the chance to do so. Salam away.
So maybe I didn't respond for the questions. So to respond for in one sentence, it ratified WHO FCTC in year of 2014. Privatization of JTI took place in year of 2016 and 2017. And for the question related with why high political support, maybe I cannot for sure. But from our study, it indicated that after the change of the political regimen of Dr. Abiy in year of 2018, there are progresses in tobacco control area. That is, one is the proclamation, strong proclamation, also change in tobacco taxation and other issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Salamowit, that was great. And Dennis?
Thank you so much, Jeff. I would like to use these 2 minutes to speak about two concerns that have been raised in a Q&A. One is whether the ranking of countries is justified. Yes, it could be. It's justified based on a matrix, but I would like to highlight that tobacco industry interference and 5.3 are related but very, very different because of the specificity of Article 5.3. So while I mentioned that Uganda is viewed as a tobacco control success story, so 5.3 and industry monitoring are both interventions that in a way contribute towards controlling the use of tobacco, and 5.3 is a response to tobacco industry interference. So the ranking, the good ranking for tobacco industry interference gives us an idea that there is work done in a country to regulate tobacco, and you would expect that another intervention, the country would do well in another intervention. So what our study finds is that while Uganda does well at monitoring, there are still challenges that are very, very particular to 5.3. Then,
great, thanks so much, Dennis. Apologies for cutting you off. Shalini.
Yeah, so I would only like to suggest that there should be a state level analysis for the state which has already implemented these guidelines, so that that would be the learning for the other state. Those are still in the process of implementing these guidelines, so that best practices could be highlighted in the state from the state which has already implemented these guidelines, so that could be the learning for other states.
That's great, thank you. And Praveen?
Yes, Karnataka has shown a political commitment in implementing all sort of tobacco control policies. So if proper resources and supports are provided by the government, all the stakeholders, civil society, I'm very sure that Karnataka model will be a success story in the upcoming days. Thank you.
That's great, thanks very much, Praveen. And finally, Abdullah.
Thank you. It's usually said that a National Tobacco Control Cell has a limited mandate because of the absence of our national guideline and the code of conduct. So since this drafting is completed already, So I would just like to see that this draft is going to be approved very soon, and we will have the guideline in place. And I believe that if it's implemented properly, then the implementation status of Article 5.3 in Bangladesh is going to be really, really in good shape. And also, if there can be a good amount of research in Bangladesh regarding Article 5.3, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Abdullah, and thanks everybody. I'd like to thank the audience for your very active engagement today, and please do follow up with us with any further questions or queries that you might have. We're very keen for the discussion to be ongoing. And I'd just like to wrap up now by thanking the speakers for what I think has been a really excellent set of presentations. So thank you, and goodbye, everybody.